We all have our own implicit biases, the beliefs, attitudes, and ingrained opinions that influence how we perceive and interact with the world around us. Implicit bias is inescapable. It's written into our personality code. It's how we mitigate against it that counts. As the Austrian psychiatrist and Auschwitz survivor Viktor E. Frankl said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. We develop biases from birth, and there are various types. Affinity bias, for example, is when we show an unbalanced leaning toward people who are like us. While confirmation bias is when we interpret new evidence as confirmation of what we already believe. In the classroom, we often deal with topics that are outside our personal experience. We make assumptions about things all the time, and the same can be said of our students. Focus on empathy by having students pair up to discuss how their lives are the same and different. Flip the discussion by having each student walk in others' shoes. When working on action-driven projects, encourage students to think about people affected by hunger, poverty, and gender inequality. How can we encourage them to discuss the ways that bias around these issues can manifest itself?
My class is a safe zone where they can talk about anything, and they have to be respectful and mindful of each other because we come from different places. We have kids that have opposing points of view, and one of the things that I teach them and I always tell them is that you have to listen to the other person. You may not agree, but you have to listen. I go, if you all learn to listen to each other, you're going to change the world.
By diversifying our network of colleagues and advisors, we give ourselves a better chance of identifying and reflecting on bias in the classroom. How can we build upon our existing professional learning network to include people who challenge us to approach an issue from a different angle, or whose perspective might open up our students' minds to at least consider a different way of thinking? Bias can even exist in our classroom resources. Are we always using materials from the same places, books by the same authors? Are our examples always the same? Identifying and developing new source materials, primary sources in particular, helps recognise and challenge biases that slip into our classrooms.
I did a lesson with James Baldwin. James Baldwin was a thinker of the 1960s. He fits somewhere in between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., which the kids always hear about. They got to hear James Baldwin speak, and they were able to talk about the issues that he was speaking in a way that it was safe. They were on every side of the spectrum. Some said, well, no, it's because this doesn't exist anymore. And the others are saying, yeah, it does. You're not living it. But it was always in an open dialogue form. And it was, I think, incredible for them to hear history that they usually don't get.
Implicit bias impacts how we treat our students, colleagues, and subject matter. If we're aware of it and reflect on it, we can help our students and ourselves stay open to new ideas and remain mindful of our own actions. Recognising it and confronting implicit bias builds empathy, self-awareness, and in the end, a fairer and more thoughtful world.